So there was an announcement from Archwell Philanthropies that appeared this week, and I think it needs to be placed directly alongside everything that happened last week at Swinburne University during the Australian tour. And I know while the headlines were saying something completely different, Archwell Philanthropies was doing something incredible behind the scenes. And Archwell Philanthropies, they announced its continued support of the Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund as it releases its third cohort of grantees. So 24 youth and intergenerationally led organizations collectively receiving $1.9 million in funding. And the funding is to advance a safer and more equitable digital future. $1.9 million to youth-led organizations that are working on artificial intelligence accountability and ethics, that are working on youth mental health programs, digital safety and privacy, civic engagement, and climate innovation. Now, there's a reason this story caught my interest, because I want to place it next to what happened last week on their tour of Australia. So as you know, they went to Swinburne University on day 3 of the Australian tour. And Harry and Meghan, they sat with young people from Beta, a preventative youth mental health organisation that works with young Australians who live in rural and remote communities. And they are being failed by a crisis-driven mental health system. And Meghan said that she had been bullied online every day for the past 10 years. And she is still here. And she said she knows it's a $1 billion industry predicated on cruelty. And they use that cruelty and hate to get clicks. And it's not going to change because they're making too much money. And she said that you have to be stronger than all that. So imagine knowing that you as a person, your name, and you as a person, you have become an economy. You yourself, you are $1 billion economy. And people generate clicks and ad money, whatever money, just by hating you. Imagine that. Imagine that. And yet Meghan found the grace to stay in the room and say, guys, this is what's happening to me. And I'm still here. So if I can come through all that, you can do it too. And they put their money where their mouth is. So when they got back home, they then gave $1.9 million to fund organizations that are doing incredible things in combating all the nonsense and the hate out there that is online. I think that is extremely commendable. And Harry said that Australia was the first country to ban under 16s from social media, and he called it epic from a responsibility and leadership standpoint. He then said that companies can target a child with extraordinary precision, but then claim, oh, we cannot protect the same child because it's very complicated. So imagine you can spend a lot of time, energy, and resources targeting a child, but you refuse to spend the same time, energy, resources in protecting that same child from the harmful effects of what you've done to it. It's disgusting. And while they were saying those things in that room at Swinburne University, Archwell Philanthropies was actually in the process of funding 24 youth-led organizations that are working precisely on the problems that were being discussed in that room at Swinburne University. This is why I stand. This is why I like Harry and Meghan. This is why I like my faves, because they put their money where their mouth is. They don't just talk about doing it, they actually go out and do it. They actually go out there, talk about it, highlight the issue, and then fund the resolution, and they fund the solution to those issues. I love it. So this for me is what sustained philanthropic commitment looks like. It is not a one-off hospital visit. It is not a tour engagement timed for maximum photo ops. Yes, you know who I'm talking about. The other girl and the other brother. And it's not a charity appearance that generates coverage about what Meghan was wearing or how she looked or how she was wearing some dead woman's pearls and nothing else. This is a third cohort of grantees, 24 organizations, $1.9 million, a fund that is now in its third year of making grants, a model that shares decision-making power with young leaders through intergenerational governance and youth participation in funding decisions. The Responsible Technology Youth Power Fund specifically positions young people not just as the recipients of philanthropic attention, but as architects of the solutions. So it's not just a matter of, oh yeah, we're going to give you a bunch of money, but it's actually funding solutions. Because if the large tech companies will not fund solutions, then people like Archwell Philanthropies, they're going to step in and fund those solutions because they recognize the damage that is being done in real time because they are first-hand recipients of such damage. So they understand and they know that the world, that the social media damage and the press damage is creating is not a safe one. It's not safe for anybody. Women are not safe. Girls are not safe. Children are not safe. Even men are not safe. Nobody is safe in this horrible world that these people are creating online. And we know that the fund that Harry and Meghan are now giving is shifting who gets to shape the future of technology and how. Because the big technology companies, already with the way AI is going, it looks like many of us will not be able to do without AI. Which means they could potentially lead us down a really, really dangerous path. And we see the effects already. So yeah, I love this approach, and this is the precise approach that Harry described at the InterEdge Summit. This approach that it puts people that are most affected by the challenges in the room where the solutions are being designed. So it's not just a matter of you saying, oh yeah, it's such a bad thing. Oh my God, how horrible. We're bringing awareness that this is a horrible thing to happen. That is not good enough nowadays. You also need to bring solutions. And the awareness and the problems and the solutions, they need to be in the same room. And that is what Harry described. And also, I love this approach because it treats young people not as the problems to be managed, but as leaders to be resourced. Because when young people complain about it, it's oh my God, yeah, they're complaining. How do we manage that? But this is about proper accountability, and this is about funding the very young people, because young people are not just resilient, they are incredibly creative, and they can sit down and find solutions to these horrible things that are happening digitally. But anyway, it doesn't matter what the British press say. It doesn't matter what the haters say. It doesn't matter how many petitions they're opening. The bottom line is Harry and Meghan's work is forging ahead, it's surging ahead, and they are doing incredible things. And they are to be commended for dipping their hand in their own pocket and giving $1.9 million to 24 organizations. And those are the numbers that I would love to see in my news every day. But anyway, let me have your thoughts, please. My name's Elizabeth. I'm the author of The Luxpreneur, and for more insights like these, please like, share, comment, and hit the subscribe button. And thank you so much for getting me to 6,000 subscribers. I am over the moon. We only have 94,000 to go. Yes, I've been told by one of you to think big, and she said, yep, we need to get you to 100,000. So, hey, I'm up for it. But thank you so much, guys. I truly, truly appreciate you. I appreciate your comments. When I can, because sometimes there's so many of them, when I can, I do try to respond. So thank you so much. And to support my work in holding truth to power, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Elizabeth Slaru, or you can get a copy of my book, The Luxpreneur, from Amazon, Waterstones, or Barnes & Noble.
Kate, Diana, and the standard of royal service. The comparison between Kate and Diana is not one of cruelty, but of clarity. Diana was 19 when her relationship with Charles became public, 20 when she became engaged, and 20 when she undertook her first official royal engagements under a level of press scrutiny that makes anything Kate has faced look modest. She was naturally shy. She had a soft voice. She had no institutional preparation, no communications team, no elocution coaching in the early years, and no roadmap for what she was being asked to do. And yet she became one of the most effective communicators in the history of the modern monarchy. Not because shyness disappeared, but because she understood that the work was the work, and that the people she was meeting deserved her full presence and her full effort, regardless of how difficult the environment felt. She managed it at 21 without years of preparation.
Newly married,
Kate
and Meghan
is 44, with 15 years of institutional support behind her. Yet the framing remains one of limitation rather than responsibility. The soft voice is presented as an insurmountable barrier, a characteristic that somehow can't be managed through microphones, through positioning, through the specific techniques that professional speakers use in crowded environments. Techniques that the institutional machinery around Kate has had 15 years to help her master. But this is not fundamentally about acoustics. It is about the standard itself. Diana never found her voice in the sense of perfection or comfort. She never stopped looking for it. She took it into AIDS wards and minefields and homeless shelters. She found it in every room she walked into because the people in those rooms needed her to. That is the standard, not the sympathy. The standard, the carefully constructed narrative. The footage itself demands scrutiny before any emotional response takes hold. This was not captured at a state occasion or a sanctioned public appearance where press presence is expected and documented. This was filmed at a private palace reception, an intimate gathering meant for invited guests to celebrate the Queen's centenary in relative privacy. Yet somehow this private moment exists in recorded form and has been strategically distributed to multiple publications, each delivering the coverage with a sympathetic lens carefully calibrated to position the subject as relatable and vulnerable. Nothing at the palace happens by accident, and the machinery of royal communications is far too sophisticated for this sequence of events to be anything other than deliberately orchestrated. The footage was filmed, collected and released with precise timing and calculated framing, a managed piece of strategy designed to reshape public perception at a specific moment when the contrast with the warmth and energy of the Australian tour had become impossible to ignore in newsrooms across Britain. The decision to present Kate this way at this time tells us far more about the intentions behind the release than it does about the substance of what was actually said. The infrastructure of preparation. Why institutional support should yield results. Kate has inhabited the public sphere for more than 2 decades, backed by the full institutional machinery of one of the world's most established monarchies. Since September 2022, when she assumed the title of Princess of Wales, she has operated within a comprehensive support structure that most public figures could only imagine. Access to elocution lessons refined over years, presentation coaches trained in the art of royal communication, and communications advisors positioned at every level to smooth her path forward. Yet, despite this 15-year runway of preparation, 15 years of institutional resources, strategic positioning, and professional guidance, she continues to find even routine engagements genuinely challenging. The paradox is striking. A woman with every possible advantage, every technical tool, every expert at her disposal, still reports that these environments present authentic difficulties. One might reasonably ask whether the problem lies not in the absence of preparation, but in what that preparation has been designed to achieve, and whether the work itself, the fundamental commitment to show up consistently and fully for the communities and causes one is meant to serve, has been adequately prioritized alongside the carefully curated presentation of vulnerability and relatability. Diana's path without preparation. Diana Spencer became a public figure at 19 when her relationship with Charles entered the public consciousness. And by 20, she was engaged and conducting her first official royal engagements under a level of press scrutiny that would have broken most people. She possessed none of the institutional scaffolding that modern royalty takes for granted. No communications advisors strategizing her every word. No elocution coaches refining her delivery. No years of preparation mapping out how to navigate the machinery of monarchy. She was naturally shy. She had a soft voice. She had no roadmap for what she was being asked to do. No institutional infrastructure cushioning her. No support system whispering guidance in her ear. And yet, despite these absences, despite the rawness of her inexperience and the intensity of the spotlight, she became one of the most effective communicators in the history of the modern monarchy. Not because shyness suddenly evaporated, or because crowds became easier, or because her voice somehow grew louder, but because she understood that the work demanded presence, regardless of how difficult the environment felt. That the people she was meeting deserved her full effort and full attention, and that managing her own discomfort was simply part of the job she had accepted. She managed it at 21, without the years of preparation, without the teams of experts, without any of the institutional support that would later become standard. She simply showed up, completely unprepared, and became extraordinary. The soft voice as a manageable challenge. A soft voice is not an inability to perform the role. It is a characteristic, one that exists on a spectrum, and one that can be managed through the professional infrastructure that exists precisely for this purpose. Microphones exist. Strategic positioning exists. The specific techniques that professional speakers employ in crowded environments exist. These are not theoretical solutions. They are documented practice methods that have been refined over decades. And yet, the institutional machinery surrounding Kate, the same machinery that has had 15 years to address this particular challenge, has apparently not resolved it. The barrier is not insurmountable. It is not immovable. It is a characteristic that, with the full weight of palace resources, communications advisors, elocution coaches and presentation specialists behind it, should have been worked through by now. Instead, it persists. It is named, it is sympathised with, and it remains, after all this time, apparently unresolved. The measure of institutional responsibility. There is a particular irony in how royal work ethic is assessed in contemporary commentary, and it deserves honest examination rather than the comfortable narratives that often shield institutional figures from scrutiny. The frequency and consistency of appearances form the backbone of what constitutes genuine commitment to the role. Yet Kate's engagement numbers are notably low compared to historical precedent and compared to what the position of Princess of Wales demands. This is not speculation whispered in drawing rooms. It is documented record that is frequently discussed in royal coverage precisely because the disparity is undeniable and measurable. The institution has had 15 years to establish patterns of presence and service. And the archival evidence tells a different story than the one constructed around moments of warmth during her appearances. Warmth in a room, however genuine, does not compensate for limited presence across communities, causes, and the systematic expectation of visibility that comes with the time. A monarch's institution is built on the unglamorous foundation of showing up again and again in all weather and in all circumstances, and the comparative absence from that foundational work cannot be reframed as relatable vulnerability without fundamentally questioning what the role itself requires. The calculated release, timing as strategic narrative control. The video's emergence during Centenary Week, strategically positioned in the aftermath of the Australian tour, was no coincidence of scheduling, but rather a carefully orchestrated moment of narrative management. The contrast between Kate's subdued presence in lilac and the electrifying standing ovation afforded to Meghan by 300 women in Sydney had begun to crystallise in newsrooms across Britain, creating an uncomfortable comparison that demanded attention. The palace's decision to release this footage of private vulnerability at precisely this juncture, when the warmth of the Australian reception was still fresh and increasingly difficult to ignore, reveals the calculated nature of the timing itself. By distributing the video to multiple publications with sympathetic framing, the institution positioned Kate's struggles not as accountability for diminished presence or engagement, but as a relatable human difficulty, a vulnerability that invites compassion rather than scrutiny. The narrative pivot was deliberate, transformed the conversation from comparative effectiveness and public presence into one of personal challenge and understanding. Nothing at the palace happens by accident, and this particular moment, this particular release, in this particular week, demonstrates that the timing and distribution were chosen with full awareness of the media landscape and the specific comparison that had begun to dominate royal coverage. The sympathetic framing of difficulty as something to be understood rather than measured against institutional standards becomes the very mechanism through which accountability is circumvented. Diana's standard of service. Diana never stopped seeking her voice despite the genuine difficulty she faced. The shyness, the softness of tone, the weight of impossible expectations. Yet she brought her full presence into every space that required it. The AIDS wards, where patients needed to know they mattered. The minefields, where communities needed to see their princess walk among the danger they lived with daily. The homeless shelters, where the forgotten needed to feel seen. She found her voice not because the environments became easier, or because she suddenly became a confident public speaker, but because the people in those rooms needed her to find it. They needed her full effort, her complete attention, her authentic engagement, not her apologies or her explanations about why the work was hard. The standard of service is not measured in sympathy for the challenges faced by those in position to serve. It is measured in presence, in consistency, in the willingness to show up again and again, regardless of whether the room feels crowded or your voice feels small. That distinction matters. That is the expectation. That is the standard.